Hello and welcome to our next episode of Sex in the News. I'm Dr. Jen and I'm here with
Eli Irvin.
And we're here to talk about sex in the news. And Eli and I were just basically saying that we can't keep up because the article that we're going to talk about, or the issue we're going to talk about, came out 2 weeks ago, and it just feels like every day there's something that we could sit down and talk about. But unfortunately, we have day jobs that we actually have to treat people so we can pay our bills.
Yeah.
and help the world. So what I wanted to talk about today was the Supreme Court case that I'm not sure if anyone is aware. There's been, since January 15th, there's been a lot of things going on and a lot of things in the news cycle. So this might have gotten kind of dumped. But a couple weeks ago, the Supreme Court heard the arguments for the case. And what this basically is, here's my proviso. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. Eli
Neither am I.
He's not an attorney. We're not constitutional lawyers. So like we always get comments about people like, well, that's not technically right. Not attorneys, therapists, right? So
yes.
We're here not really to talk about the legal part of it, but about the content of what the lawsuit is about. So I just feel like I have to put that proviso out because somebody's going to be like, well, you didn't get that law right.
Yeah, they're going to be like, technically.
Not attorneys. Not attorneys. Anyway, so to just kind of summarize and then we can dig into it, I have a couple of documents that I'm working from. So the 15th, the New York Times article that I kind of pulled this from, but in our community, we have known this is going on because we work with a lot of people that struggle with pornography. Eli particularly works with more of the adolescents in our practice who struggle with pornography. And this is really absolutely about them and the First Amendment and all of this other stuff.
Right.
But so Texas is one of quite a few states in recent history that have passed laws where age verification is required for people to go on pornography sites, or pornography sites like Pornhub, right? So you have to put in some kind of age verification so you can get in there in order to avoid children getting all of this massive online exposure to pornography, which they are doing. Like that's
now it's more now. People have to understand it's a more thorough part of age verification, where it's more like a digital ID or something like that. It's not something like the conventional what we've been seeing for decades, where you just input your a fake birth date and then that's all you have to do and then you're in there.
Yes, I'm 18.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So it's part of the argument, right? Is that because it is taking people's personal information.
Right. It takes the anonymity out of it.
So there are folks who are, this is versus the state of Texas. Again, there's other states that have implemented this law. So the Supreme Court is hearing this argument against the state of Texas because the people who are suing the state of Texas are saying like this is unconstitutional, right? It's violating freedom of speech, etc., First Amendment rights. So they had a ruling in their favor, and then recently the Supreme Court justices heard arguments from both sides. The headline of the New York Times article is that the Supreme Court seems ready to back Texas law limiting access to pornography. And I just want to give a little backstory, and I'm probably going to ask Eli to chime in because he has a lot of experience working with our young people who are dealing with pornography. So I also have in our sort of treatment community, some folks submitted an amicus brief as part of the case. And then there's some other things going on. So again, this is where the I am not an attorney part comes in, right? So there was a Brown versus, I think it's the Entertainment Merchants Association in 2011. I'm reading this. This is not off my head. That basically stated, I'm just going to read this. The basic principles of the First Amendment are twofold. On one hand, adults have a right to view adult content, right? Like that's your right. You're grown-ass adults. You can do that.
Right.
And then the Stanley versus Georgia, which is from 1969, ruled that states have a right and duty to protect minors. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go back. So Stanley versus Georgia in 1969 is also part of this. So there's three cases, 2011, a 1969, and a 1968 case. And again, this is where
so Brown is 2011, Stanley is 1969.
And Ginsburg is 1968. So basically saying the combined rulings, not an attorney, adults have the right to view adult content. Yep, that's your First Amendment right. That's freedom of speech. That's People v. Larry Flint from all time way ago. But states also have a right and duty to protect minors, right? So that's what's at hand. A more recent, and I'm going to say more recent, meaning that's 20 years ago, is a Moody versus Net Choice, which was probably in the day like one of the net servers. I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And the ruling of that was basically they were trying to get age verification, again, not an attorney, and it was ruled against because at the time, the courts felt that filters were enough to keep children out of pornography sites, right? They're like, there's filters, there's technology to keep, kids from getting onto online, pornography sites. So we're going to rule against the age verification at that time. And again, this is me being a very non-attorney summarizing it. And in terms of the amicus brief, one of the things that folks, as well as the attorneys, are arguing is that, and I'll let Eli chime in on this, do filters actually work?
No, they don't. These kids are not stupid. If anything, they try. They're like, I like to preface this with like, these teenagers are similar to the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, where they like to just test boundaries and like attack the fence to see if at different points and different access points to see if they can get out, if they could breach that fence and breach that wall. So these kids are constantly going to try to get access to whatever they want, whenever they want, if they can.
I mean, they're curious, they're kids push boundaries, like all of that is kind of normal adolescent behavior, but then put in this context of online pornography. And so, we always say, where there's a will, there's a way, right? Like, so as a parent, yep, you can put in content blockers and you can put in filters. And then like 3 seconds later, after a new one comes out, there's a YouTube video on how to get around it, right?
Right.
So one of the main arguments is that filtering doesn't work. Does it work for some kids? Absolutely, right?
Sure.
For some kids, is it enough of a stopgap or a speed bump?
No.
Some kids.
Some kids will do whatever they need to do in order to get rid of that firewall. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That border.
And so that's one of the arguments that folks are making against this. And the other piece is the argument, and this is, a lot of the research background and stuff, is that early exposure, right, to online pornography is actually pretty damaging to young kids, right? And so depending on what studies you look at, average age of first exposure is around 8 to 10.
8 to 10.
8 to 10. Right. And, if you just, and that's not necessarily intentionally searching for it. They can just stumble upon it.
Right.
But given the content, and the other piece of that argument, there's actually many pieces, is that the alteration in the types of content, right, of pornography content that's out there now versus 20 or 30 years ago, these kids' first exposure could be to something very violent. It could be to rape pornography. It could be to, some pretty
asphyxiation pornography. It's like a
choking, all of this stuff. And so actually I'm going to toss this over to you, Eli, and, in your experience with the adolescents that you work with, did you have any thoughts of like how they're coming across pornography, like what they tell you their kind of initial reactions to that are, or how that kind of works?
So most of the time, a lot of the kids, the first exposure to it is usually like they just stumble upon it, or some of them are they either stumble upon it or they're very curious, right? So
kids are sexually curious. That's
they're just sexually curious,
behavior.
Right? It's normal adolescent behavior, and they just go on Google and just put in boobs.
Yep.
Something as like very benign, nothing crazy, right? And then where it gets into troubled waters is when they start to just click on random things to just continue to see more of it. Mm-hmm. So the thing is that, okay, if they're crushing on someone at school and they don't have the confidence and self-esteem enough to, have that kind of relationship, start an appropriate relationship with a peer that is of their age, right? They go to the internet to see what a naked person looks like. Mm-hmm. And then they just go down a rabbit hole on the different sites, because next thing you know, a porn site is going to pop up on the results tab, and then they click it, and then all hell breaks loose. Because now they're exposed to millions of videos and images of the crazy, like the things that they have never seen before.
Right.
So now to answer your question, as far as like what is their initial reaction, most of it is just like, whoa, all this is crazy. Like what is this? This is a whole new world, like Aladdin. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And one hand, they get very, you get even more curious, because now it's just like, okay, I know something that some of my peers don't know. Mm-hmm. And then next thing you know, they're showing their friend Billy and Tom and Kevin, and they're showing, and then it just spreads like wildfire, because it's just all it takes is one video. Mm-hmm. And then they just copy and paste it and send it via the phone.
Their
And the
text
next thing you
links
know,
are in the chat
they're
apps or
texting
whatever
and
they're doing.
chatting. Yeah, chatting, Snapchat, all that stuff. So it's just like it just gets crazy because they also don't want to be the only one with this privy knowledge. And once you have that knowledge, you got to tell somebody.
Well, and it's, when I talk about this when I teach, is sort of like they're, if they come across it, maybe emotionally they don't have that, they're not yet emotionally in that place where they can process it or they can really understand it, but their bodies are like,
yeah,
whoa, that is like, I'm having a reaction to that there's something about that is super cool and super exciting, but I don't have, again, right, like the emotional development to really process what's going on. So yeah, they're going to be like, well, damn, right? Like they're having a biological reaction to something that they don't understand.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you this question. When those kids stumble, I know the answer, it's a bit rhetorical, but I'll still ask you. When those kids, and again, this is in general, stumble upon that pornography, how often are they going to their parents to talk about it and ask them questions?
Absolutely never. They're never going to talk to them. They're never going to tell them what they stumble upon. Why? Because it's shameful, right? It's, you already have this feeling like this is something that you are not supposed to look at. And it's just like that innate feeling of just like, and at the time you still just don't know, but at the same time you do know. It's just like, this is not something that I should be looking at, nor am I going to tell my parents about it. So they're going to be very scared.
Kids don't really want to talk about porn with their parents.
They don't even want to talk about who their crush is to their parents most of the time.
Right. And that's what I get. And again, like years ago, I wrote that book that was really more about parents and their stuff. And it's, I will preach this till the day I die, that, parents need to be having these uncomfortable conversations and they need to be having these awkward conversations. And they need to start doing that before their children actually stumble upon pornography, so that when they get there,
right,
they have a relationship with their parents where sex isn't shameful and they can just be like, hey, Dad, I was looking for something for homework and this came up and I didn't know what to do with it, right? Like, it's out there, it does happen, but that takes so much effort on the parents' part and getting over their own shame or stigma about sexual porn to be able to, talk to their kids about it.
Yeah, because it's just like for, if you think about it, right, for generations, right, people's parents, when it comes to sex, the conversation of sex and religion being involved or not even, it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have with your kids, because it's just like, okay, and even nowadays, right, it's going to be like, where's the line where it blurs? How can I have a conversation about sex and porn or sex with my kid without getting in trouble myself?
Right. Or knowing sort of the right, or getting good information to do that is always
getting good information, or even looking for, what are going to be the appropriate resources that are available so that I can kind of start the conversation.
Yeah. So I remember, again, the book is old and a bit outdated now, but when I was writing that, there was a study I came across from the UK about like what percentage of parents actually got in fights about knock down, drag out, yelling, screaming kind of fights about who was going to be responsible for talking to the kids about sex education and things like that. Yeah. I'm going to do a plug. We get no kickbacks, right? There is a nonprofit organization called Educate Empower Kids, and they do these series of books. They're fantastic. And they're just like these little short conversations about, like for parents to kind of initiate little conversations about, sexuality topics with their children. They do have one book that is specifically about pornography, but it starts actually, we actually talked about this in class on Tuesday. They're like, well, when do you start talking to your kids about this stuff? And like one of their books, this is little kids, right? They're talking 3 to 11 years old, or, 3 to 8 or 3 to 5. You're clearly not talking to kids about porn and sex at 3, but you're starting conversations about privacy and boundaries and autonomy and things like that. And consent and moving those up in an age appropriate manner. But that's just my plug for, they do have like this little book of like how to start these little conversations about pornography with your kids, and you're going to be embarrassed and your kid's going to be embarrassed. And I don't care, right? Like, yeah,
it's a natural thing. Like, it's just that when you're talking about sex, like it's a natural thing. We all do it. Like,
we wouldn't be here if people weren't having sex, right? Like, it's a biological function.
Yeah, but to get so weirded out about it, and it's just like, I just feel like a lot of parents get hung up on what is right and what is wrong, that they just don't have the conversation. They'd just rather not have the conversation and let the kids figure it out along the way.
Instead of being like, Johnny, this is incredibly uncomfortable for me too, but we're going to have this conversation. Right. And the other piece of that is that, again, not all states require sex education in school. Not all states, if they do require medically accurate sex education. And most schools are not incorporating pornography literacy into their sex education courses when they do have it. So they're not getting it at school because like, that's a hot button too, even though it should be taught.
Right. And I remember when I went to this Christmas party and I told you about this guy who was a teacher in Brooklyn, New York, and he was just like, you know, he's a health and sex education teacher, and he was just like, we can't have the conversation about sex. That's just a no. Like he's just like, that's like breaches like legal stuff. He was like,
and he's a sex education teacher.
He's a sex education teacher. So what he does is he has the kids write questions and put it in like a suggestion box, right? And then he has to like, you know, there's an anonymity with it. So it's just like he tries to answer these questions as best as he could.
And then he can like answer the question in the class,
right.
But it's not an actual conversation with somebody, right? Because we're just so hung up on that still. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, ironically, it was sex education discussion week this week in the class I'm teaching. So a lot of this came up about like, what education do people get? Nothing, right?
Nothing. It's pretty much like, even though they get something, but it's pretty much nothing.
And
it's
then,
just like glance over.
You know, so part of the reason some of the kids are, and I'm kind of jumping around, but that's like a part of the reason some of the kids are going online to look at pornography is sex education, right?
Right.
If I have curiosity, if I am not getting the education, or I don't feel comfortable talking to my parents, or like I hear my friends talking, you know, the banter talk about something and I don't know what that is, what am I going to do? I'm Google and look that up. And, you know, so a lot of kids are getting sex education at some level from pornography, which is potentially horrifying, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
it's not it because a lot of it too is that the kids don't realize that it is scripted, it's edited, there's takeouts. They just don't understand the behind the scenes thing, because all they see is a finished product, because it's just like they feel as though it's just like a movie, right? But at the same time, these are real people, so they kind of can't differentiate between
what that is. And I'm a generation or so older than Eli, but you know, pornography today is very different than, you know, like the Bound Chicka Wow Wow pornography when I was young that was actually like on a video, right? Like a VHS or something.
Yeah,
but like there was a faux story and, you know, there was some personal interaction. And what today's pornography very much, stereotypically, not all of it, has turned into is very much just like like it's just penetration, or it's the act. There's nothing about it that is like in, you know, an interaction, and it's really just acts, that whole evolution of gonzo porn and everything, that it's just, you're not even seeing like the whole process of a sexual encounter that people would have. It's just boom, like, oh hey, how are you, and now we're having a threesome with double penetration and all of this other stuff, right?
Yeah, because most of it is just like, it could be like a compilation, right? And it's just like, there you go, it's just like all just, you know, part of my French, but fuck fest. And then you don't see anything up, no foreplay at all, or the person who's looking at the pornography, right, is just trying to skip through all that and just get right to it. So there's just like nobody has patience anymore.
Well, I was gonna say that part of that is like the attention span, right? That we only watch video clips that are certainly small. So I want to run through a little bit too of some of the research articles cited in the amicus brief, and we can kind of talk about some of that. But one of the ones, actually, I mean, there's a number of things to talk about, but one of the ones, and this is actually newer, which is why I wanted to talk about it, and I think it speaks to some of the things that we see. And so this, they cite a January 2024 report from the United Kingdom, the National Police Chiefs Council, where they released a report indicating there's been a quadrupling of underage victims of sexual offenses in the past decade.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Of the 107,000 reported sexual offenses against children, this is out of the UK, 52% of the alleged offenders were also children. The report said this is predominantly a gender-based crime of boys. Girls are at particular risk of of committing the offenses. Sorry, wrong page. Police are making direct links between the availability and accessibility of violent pornography for boys and the increase in sexual violence perpetration. Boys are watching violent porn on their smartphones and then going to attack girls. That's a direct quote.
Yeah.
A 2023 Global Alliance Global Threat Assessment report found a 360% increase in self-generated sexual imagery of 7 to 10-year-olds. So like there's a lot going on that is involving offending. But in particularly, I think of sometimes when we get the young people in for Eli to work with who are there for some type of what they're calling a sex crime. Like sometimes they're watching porn and then what are they doing?
They're imitating it. They're mimicking it. They're mimicking it. So because they've seen this online, they feel as though like this is what sex is. This is what I'm supposed to be doing because I want to get, be 10 steps ahead when I get to have sex with Susie, right? So they look up all this porn and then they come across the violent porn.
And that's
right?
normal, right? Their assumption is that's normalized, right?
Their assumption is that it's normal to get engaged in asphyxiation behavior during sex, right? But again, what they don't see is the consent piece of it beforehand. They don't see that. So they're assuming that this is what you're supposed to do when you have sex. So when I go try to have sex with Susie,
all partners want whatever X
all
is,
partners
right?
want that. That's all what girls want because I'm watching this porn clip and this girl is liking, and this woman is liking the choking.
Yeah,
so if I'm the kid and I'm like, okay, this is what girls like, then I'm gonna do that with my girlfriend Susie. But then when I try that with Susie, Susie's like, what the fuck?
Right, because Susie does not, in fact, want that.
Susie probably 9 times out of 10 doesn't want that. Number one, she doesn't want that. Number two, she probably has never seen pornography before, or potentially never seen that kind of pornography before.
And he surely didn't ask.
And number three, he didn't ask. He didn't have a conversation because again, he was assuming that this is what girls like. This is what girls want.
Because this is what's going on in the pornography videos. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think we've also seen that with some contact cases, again, with that curiosity. And then, they end up touching like maybe a younger cousin or a younger sibling.
Oh, yeah. We see that a lot.
Or things like that.
Yeah.
And so I think if you want to talk about that, it's kind of a different avenue that we see.
Yeah. So most of the adolescents that I have seen have had cases like that where they have touched a younger sibling or a cousin, someone pretty much within the family dynamic, right?
Access, right? It's usually
access is easy access, right? And obviously it's more of an opportunist behavior. So, but still, it's the early access of pornography where it's just like, okay, yeah, it's just like, that's cool. I wonder, I want to experience that. I want to see what that feels like for myself.
Right.
So, but again, this goes back to my point of when the adolescent doesn't have that self-esteem and the confidence and the wherewithal to have conversations with the person that they like in school in an age with another age appropriate person.
Yeah.
And the fear of rejection and all of that mixed in with it, right? To evade all that is to go with a cousin and try to be like, hey, like, let's try this.
And unfortunately, a very easy access victim.
A very easy access victim. And it's the opportunity. I mean, they already know that person very, very well.
There's a level of trust.
There's a level of trust already that could be exploited. So they're just, and again, because these kids are adolescents, the prefrontal cortex is not yet developed.
Not fully developed, right.
Nowhere near fully developed.
Right.
So they're very just like, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm going to go just do it. So there's just that impulsivity is just through the roof.
Right, because we don't have the rational thinking. We don't have the impulse control. There's no part of them, or it's if there is that part, it's quickly overrode. And again, like people are still responsible for their own decisions, but when adolescents and young people are doing this, they literally don't have the brain structures to think things through in the same capacity, hopefully, that adults do.
Right. So they just go full steam ahead and just do it, and then next thing you know, little Timmy says, "Oh, cousin Jacob, touched me and did this to me."
Right.
And then next thing you know, Jacob is in my office, sitting in my chair.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it stems from just not having those conversations and not having that comfort level and not being able to say to mom or dad or to, trusted Uncle Bob, who's, a safe person that, I'm watching this stuff and I'm kind of digging it. What do you think? Because again,
it was just like, hey, like I've been seeing this kind of stuff.
So I actually want to touch on the choking thing.
Is this okay?
Because I don't have it in front of me, but there's been a couple of studies recently out looking at just how dramatically choking has increased in the actual sexual behavior of young people. And we see that in porn all the time. And I just like, if you do have any thoughts on that.
About seeing choking, the increase in choking.
And that, again, that's like we're seeing actual increases in like when they're talking to, younger people, teens, early 20s about their sexual experiences. What used to be considered kind of pretty abnormal, right,
is being normalized,
literally normalized, and lots of people are doing that. I would go back to, coercion, compliance, or consent, right?
Yeah.
But it's a pretty predominant thing. And again, like, if you're an adult and you have that conversation with your partner and that's your jam, you've got your safe word, knock yourself out. Right. Well, I should have said that. I don't mean that literally.
Yeah, no, literally.
No, not literally. Like, enjoy that with your partner because you've had the conversation and it's fully consensual. But what you're seeing, I think, along with the young people, and you already went back to it, is this lack of consent, right?
Right. Because again, right there, they don't know how to have conversations. Because it's so shameful.
And most people don't know how to hold the conversation.
Yeah, grown-ass people don't know how to have this conversation. It's kind of odd. Like, I'm just like, bro, like, just sit down and talk with your partner about it. This is what you're into. This is what you want to explore. I always say that
the people that we talk about sex with the least are the people that we're actually having sex with.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just that people need to have, this is why it's important for people to have conversations about this instead of just like coming out the woodwork, making laws and like trying to do the best they can to kind of do a form of deterrence when things don't actually, like, there are other things that have been criminalized and things and people still do it. So, well, it's because no one's having a conversation about how to do it in a way that's appropriate.
And I always go back to, with things like this, the ideas of compliance, coercion, and consent. And if we continue doing these videos, you're going to hear me say that a lot, right? Like, so compliance would be, maybe I'm doing something not really because I want to, and not as a gift from my partner, which is actually a voluntary consensual thing. But, if I don't do this, right? Maybe the boyfriend, the girlfriend, the partner, whomever is going to leave them, or there's going to be consequences. So they're not truly consensual, right? They're complying for the sake of something, right? Coercion is, I always kind of say, it's that like, oh, baby, if you love me, right? Where you're kind of talking and manipulating someone into, tell me your gesture.
Yep. It's dangling the carrot.
Like, oh, if you love me, baby.
Yes, you love me, babe.
We're coercing someone into a sexual behavior. That's not consent. And consent, used to say no means no. Like, no, that's not what consent is. And consent is an enthusiastic, hell yes, I want to do that, right?
Yeah.
Or if we talk about things like the wheel of consent, it's a discussion I have with my partner that maybe it's not my thing, but it doesn't offend me, and it's not something I'm aversive to, but we'll do that every now and then because that's my gift to you as my partner in a very consensual way.
Right.
But I think a lot of times in these interactions, and that's not just the adolescents, that's adults, right? They're like, oh, everybody likes anal sex. Everybody likes choking because I'm looking at that all the time. So let's just do it.
Right.
And you have a partner who's like can we at least have a conversation? Like, what the fuck? Can we have a conversation about this first? And yeah.
It's just like, you'll be very surprised how messy things could be. Because again, in pornography, it's edited and there's prep. There's a lot of things that comes up that you have to do in order for it to be such a clean scene. So
fluffers and lube people.
Yeah, and if only people knew the crazy shit that these porn stars have to do in order to make the finished product, it probably would make you be like, I don't even want to engage in this stuff anymore because it's just like so.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's it, because we spend our lives kind of talking about this kind of stuff with clients, and I know Eli and I have both kind of gone down that bunny hole of like, what is ethical porn? Is ethical porn even an actual possibility? And what does that mean? And what do these actors and performers have to go through, and are they there? At some level, some of the production of this is very abusive to the performers, and they're manipulated into things, and it's just that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
That's another episode. We'll save
but
that
again,
for
these are
episode.
things, because if we're not talking to children about pornography literacy and helping them understand that this is a video, this is scripted, these are actors, they're being paid, this is not what most people's normal sex life looks like. We have these struggles.
Yeah, and then they look at, and I'm telling you, when you have that conversation with these kids, they're like, really? Are you serious? Like that, like, so people don't do this? No, they don't. Right. Not everyone does this. It's just like, you have to have a conversation about whether people like that stuff. But again, like they have to have some wherewithal. So either they have done it before and they like it, or they've done it before and they don't, or they never have done it.
Or they viewed it on pornography and was like, you know what, I have no desire to do that.
Right. Or they're just like, hey, I have no desire to have something up my butt like that. Like, no.
Because everybody's sexuality is very personal.
Everyone's personal. Everyone's sexuality is different. And it's just like, you gotta again, It's all about having a conversation.
I go back to, there's an exercise that I purchased a long time ago. It's from an Australian organization called Culture Reframed. And it's this pornography card sort. Eli has it sometimes up on his office wall.
Yeah,
not currently.
Real world.
But it's literally like this card sort and it's not just for kids. Like you can do that exercise for adults, and my class is going to do that this semester. But literally, like it has sexual behaviors on it, and you have to organize it between like porn sex, real life sex, or porn sex and real life sex, to literally try to get people to think about like, oh, this really doesn't happen.
Oh, man.
You know, most people are not having sex with 4 people at a time.
Right.
Right? Somebody's out there doing it consensually, but again, most people are not doing some things that you're seeing in pornography. Most people are, or many people are doing things in their personal sex life that you're not seeing in pornography.
Right, in pornography.
And so it's always I think it's always an interesting exercise to do. And like you do it more with the kids, where it is like, oh, people don't do that? Yeah.
It's like, no.
People don't do that. I'm gonna give you a little free rein. And is there anything else, kind of anything off the top of your head, since you're the guy in our practice who works mostly with the young people around this, that you kind of want to talk about? Or like, what would you tell parents if you're like, whatever your brain wants to say about all of this?
I mean, I honestly think that the parents just need to stop being so hyper vigilant about what is the right thing to say and or how, what's the right way to have a conversation with their kids about sex and porn. I think they need to really just sit down and have the conversation. If you need to get books,
right?
And read them. Don't just get the book and then be like, oh, I'll get to it later. But
do you like the thing that, because we always ask our clients about like, how did you get taught about sex education? Like buy the book and put it in the linen closet, or buy the book and put it no, actually give it to the child, talk about it with them.
Yeah. Read, obviously parades through it and, make sure it's going to be an appropriate conversation first. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there are educational books that talk about sex. Like I still remember when I was a kid, and mostly my mom,
Eli's mom is the coolest. That's just a personal shout out for Eli's mom, who is like the coolest lady.
Yeah, thanks, Mom. And it was like the birds and the bees or something like that. But there was it was all just drawn out, a bird and a bee, and then they would just like talk about, have little blurbs about talking about different organs and how people have sex. I mean, it wasn't like all out, just like visual, like like you don't see penetration, you don't see that. It was just really just like, okay, here's what a boy looks like growing up through puberty. Mm-hmm. Here's what a girl looks like growing up through puberty. This is what happens during sex. This is what, from a biological standpoint, this is what happens. There are things like that, and it's very child friendly. It literally
and again, age appropriate. People who are writing these books are sex educators who are doing appropriate things. Yeah.
And it's just like, just at least like look through the book, see if you're, even though nothing is going to make the parent 100% comfortable to have this kind of conversation. But I think that is still important for the parent to just start somewhere.
Yeah.
Start somewhere, because if you don't, your kid is going to find out through their best friend or from some person that they're dating at the time about this stuff, and then they're left to their own devices, and they're not going to know what's right and what's wrong. They're going to know what's real.
They're curious. They have raging hormones, and they don't know what's right or wrong.
Right. Just have the conversation, because think about it. If they're going through listening to someone who also never had sex before, but is pretending that they had sex before because they watched a couple porn videos, versus mom and dad who clearly have had sex before because I'm here.
They have procreated, right?
They have procreated, so clearly they know how to. They have sex. So why would I learn about sex through Timmy, who never had sex before and has only watched a few porn clips, and not have a conversation about sex with my parents?
Yeah, I'd say, like, for me, my biggest wish would be for parents to just not be in denial. And I think so many of them are in denial. Like years and years ago, when we first opened a practice, I remember we had a woman call because she was very upset that her son, she's like, oh my God, she saw that he was looking at pornography, and she was a little upset about the type of pornography. It was kind of fetishy, but it wasn't violent. It wasn't degrading. It was nothing like that. But she was like, he was 15. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe he's looked at pornography. And we're like, lady, like
he's 15.
You missed the boat. Like he's been looking at 5 years.
Yeah.
And the other piece of this, I'll tell a story about my dear friend Jen, who I think is super mom, and is one of those moms who has had conversations with all of her children, male and female, very blunt, very biologically accurate super mom kind of conversations about sex and sexuality. And her daughter, who's now in college, so she was like in 6th grade or something, was on the bus. One of her friends, and if I don't get the exact story right, it was a while ago, but something to the effect of like one of her friends who was getting texts from the boys in the back of the bus, like, take a picture of your boobs, take a picture of your boobs. So the girl did, right? Like, so she took a picture of her breasts, sent it to the boys in the back. And so my friend's daughter, because they had had all of these conversations, went home and was like, Mom, I'm really worried, right? Like, I'm really worried about this. My friend did this. You know, she was coerced by these boys to do this. And, you know, she understood that this was actually child pornography by definition and all of these things, and had a really, you know, emotionally mature conversation with her mother, because their mother had always treated Lee in an emotionally mature manner around sexuality. And so my friend called the parents of this girl, and they were like, no, my daughter would never do that, right? And basically like accused her daughter of lying and making up the story, instead of acknowledging that their daughter was coerced into doing this by the boys in the back of the bus, and having that conversation with their daughter, being like, hey, what was going on? Like, did you feel pressured to do this? This is why we shouldn't do this, you know, things like that. But it's just, get out of denial, man. Your kids are always going to push sexual boundaries. They're going to have sexual curiosity. When I was young, that wasn't, you know, you didn't have the internet, like it didn't exist, right? Like you were passing notes, you know, we passed notes in school, and, you know, nobody was taking pictures, and there was no, you know, sexting, and it was just easier, honestly. I mean, I don't think parents necessarily did a great job talking about sex with their kids then, but you didn't have all of these additional struggles with technology. So get out of denial. Your kids have seen porn. They are potentially watching it themselves. They've been exposed to stuff. If they are on social media, there are adults trying to get pictures from them.
Yeah, and it's a very scary world, and I think that that's probably what is so overwhelming for parents, is because there's all of that going on, and I do believe that there are some parents that have like more so than not, that just have no clue about what's going on with that stuff.
Not necessarily willfully ignorant or anything, but just
right. Yeah, exactly. But it's just that at the same time, the willfully ignorant, right? They're just like, oh, like, well, I don't want to know that, because then I have to address it, and I don't know how to address it.
Right.
So it's just like, that's just something else that I need to worry about. And it's just,
it's overwhelming.
It's literally overwhelming. And I do share the empathy with parents when it comes to these kind of conversations, because it is. It's just like, okay, because none of this stuff was around when we were kids, when we were our kids' age. So it's a lot, because these kids are doing so much now. They have so much ease access to each other than before.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of that, I feel like I'm plugging my ancient book, because the topics are still very relevant, and it's not happening. But it's not just the discomfort, but parents, like a lot of parents have their own stuff, right, around sexuality, right? Were they sexually abused? Was there, you know, did they grow up in a family that shamed sex and sexuality? So, you know, for a lot of parents, it's more than just, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for everybody. But for a lot of them, you know, having those conversations or getting educated about the things that are going on in their children's world in terms of sexual behavior, or, you know, the dangers out there, they have to then kind of look at their own histories and perhaps traumas or shame or all of those things around sex and sexuality. And that's really hard. Yeah,
because especially when it comes to shame, like I have a friend that told me that she was younger. She was around like adolescent age, like beginning adolescent, like 11, 12. And she started just like randomly just started touching herself. And her mother was just like, and which is just like, it happens. Like it would just be like, maybe it'd be like in an inappropriate time or something like that. But she wasn't like sitting there masturbating in front of people, but she was just like, just rubbing herself. And her mom, it feels good. So her mom would just be like, what are you doing? Like there's all that like shock factor of just like shame. So then as she grew older, she was just like, I can't do that. I just don't do that. This is bad.
It's bad. And then,
this is bad. So then as she got older, there would still be some things where she would be dating these people and she just would react that way.
Yeah.
when she, even though she gave them consent to do that, but she still had that
Because
reaction.
she had that, her own trauma stuff around that.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. So it's just like, this is also what, I mean, she obviously she grew out of that and she was just like, oh, it's fine, but it's fine now. But it took me a while. But
It's that generational
it's
trauma
that,
and the generational shame around it, right?
right.
Yeah. So if mom walks in on you masturbating in your bedroom and that freaks out, what do we learn, right? We learn that, oh, there must be something wrong with masturbation versus, hey, or if they're doing something at maybe an inappropriate time or an inappropriate location, and be like, hey, totally normal. But, and we honestly do this, this is literally like an intervention with some of our autistic clients, right?
Yeah.
Biologically normal. There's a time and a place. This is something you do in the privacy of your bedroom with your door shut. You don't do it in the living room.
And this is also with the door shut. But the thing is that a lot of parents don't have boundaries, and they just feel as though, oh, this is my house. There's no boundaries in my house. Then you open the door to some shit, and then you're just like, oh, and then you close the door.
Sorry, right?
You should have knocked in the first place, asshole. Like, just because, like, it's just like, this is like, if you have a growing child who's in an adolescent and you know what's going on within that period of time, I think you need to model healthy boundaries with your children.
Right. Yeah, and that literally, what is that? That's healthy. Hey, can I come in?
Hey,
or
are you good? You decent? Like, it's
right.
it's very simple. Like, it doesn't even have to be that thought out. Like, you just knock on the door and just like, yo, are you good? You decent? Can I come in? Mm-hmm. It's just like walking into the bathroom. You don't just barge into the bathroom.
Well, hopefully.
Hopefully. It's great. It's wild, man. Like, it's.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap it up. So I don't believe we're going to have any kind of, because I heard their arguments, I don't believe that the actual final decision is going to come till sometime this summer, maybe June or July.
Yeah, the summer.
So, I mean, I think it'll be interesting. From a research and a practice background, like, yeah, I totally agree that adolescents, young people looking at the type of pornography we're currently seeing, particularly without education, parental discussions, etc., is a really bad idea. I also worry, like, the logistics of how I'm not a tech person. So, like, what are the logistics of how you actually enforce this? And, and then I also worry about, again, parents being like, oh, well, they just can't get access to it, so I'm not going to have the discussion.
Well, yeah, we're just like, just because they don't have access to it doesn't mean that they could, like, that's willfully ignorant.
Right. Like,
literally. So that doesn't mean that they won't get exposed to it from their friend who is in a house that
somebody's dad leaves it up and has age verification, and boom, there. Yeah. I mean, there's a million ways to access it.
There's a million ways that they could stumble on it and then still share it with their friend who lives in a house that, quote unquote, doesn't have access to it. Mm-hmm. So it's just like there are other ways in which your child can find out about pornography. Mm-hmm. So it's best to have the conversation and not try to avoid having the conversation. Yeah.
So I'm gonna put some, and I'll put links up in when we post this on YouTube, that some resources, right? So Educate and Empower Kids, which I said, a fantastic sexual education organization that has all kinds of books and easy ways for parents to start those conversations, including specifically pornography. Culture Reframed is an Australian organization that puts out a lot of educational material as well. I'm sure there's others.
Your Brain on Porn is a good one too.
Your Brain on Porn is
that's good for adults and just to talk about.
Yeah, it's they have a lot of stuff on there, but they also I haven't been on there in a while, but they also
I haven't either.
Compile kind of the most, they used to at least, so I'm assuming they still do, keep sort of like the most, like a bibliography of the most recent research on pornography and its effects on not just adolescents or children, but adults. So there's that. I'm trying to think of what other good
Consent T.
Consent, there's some great little consent videos and things to talk about. But
pretty sure a lot of people know about that now, but in case the people who are watching this video don't know about it, there's a video called
Google
Consent
can see. It's a great little animated consent video that we use in teaching people. But and if there's more links up there, I'm sure there's tons of things that that we can put up. But those are some of the resources that we use in teaching and in practice with our younger people when we're talking about pornography literacy and with parents about how to talk. There's also the National Center for Sex Education, which is, I think they're based out of New Jersey, but literally, like, that's a sex education organization. They will have videos and curriculum and workbooks and all kinds of things. So, if you're a parent and you're like, okay, I need to do this, you don't have to go in blind, and you literally can buy a book, buy a workbook, buy a manual, and do it by the book. And, I think for me, it's like, it's okay to acknowledge to your kid when you're talking about, look, I totally get this is incredibly awkward for both of us. We're going to stumble through it. Yeah. Or we're going to make it work. So.
Yeah.
Any final
It's
comments before we roll out?
the only final comment that I have is just like, cause I don't know why, but I don't remember. I don't know if you remember, it was probably about like a year or two ago where it was just like all these conservative parents were raging about books and how there's like, oh, they're talking about porn in books. They're talking about this in children's books and stuff like that. And I think that they are having like I do agree that there may be some books that are a little bit too descriptive. It may not be age appropriate, but however, I do think that they have to remember that this is also an avenue in which this could be a conversation piece for the parents to talk to their kids about sex and porn. But I think that their reaction and or responses to this was so inflammatory that it shows how unwilling parents are to having the conversation with their children
or to kind of
about
get
it.
past their own stuff and get some education.
Right, because if they're like, if just by their response of getting so angry and being like, this needs to be eradicated, we need to get rid of this, like it is evident that they have their own shit that they haven't sorted out, and also that they don't want to have the conversation with at all with their kids about it. But if they don't want schools and books to start the conversation about
then they need to.
Then they need to, but they obviously don't want to. So no, do you want your kids just to find out about it, and then next thing you know, like when they're a kid, right, and it breeds up the teen pregnancy thing, right, that they're also so fucking freaked out about, which you should be, but at the same time, so neither here
right.
nor
But
there.
again, what the research tells us is comprehensive sexual education actually reduces teen pregnancy, reduces sexually transmitted infections, reduces just risky sexual behavior in kids.
So it's just like, if you don't want that to happen, again, like you keep trying to avoid the conversation, but the best way and the best form of prevention is to have the conversation with your kids. That's the best way.
I think we have the entirety of human history to give us evidence that ignoring things does not make them go away.
No, it makes the problems bigger, and then you have a bigger monster to fight, and then you need a whole village, and you need all these people to help fight this monster that you have created because you wanted to avoid it. And attack the monster when it's smaller.
When it's small, or before it even becomes a monster. And just like from the most extreme end of things, you don't want to have these conversations with your child about sex, sexuality, pornography when it ends up that they're coming to see Eli, right? Because
it's already
if your child does something and ends up in that adolescent sex offender realm, and a lot of those kids, I think a lot of those things are avoidable.
Yeah, they are.
That in some states you're on the sex offender registry for life, and it's a very trying experience, not just for the kid. The kids get therapy, they get the help that perhaps they need and the education, but it's also, I mean, it's a massive thing for the parents as well.
And really quick, this is something that I think would scare the shit out of the parents. Because remember, there was an article that we both read, and I think it was like the youngest child of sex offender that was convicted and had to register as a sex offender. I think was 8 years old?
I think 8 or 9.
8 or 9 years old. So parents out there, if you guys don't have this conversation, depending on what state you're in, and your kid commits a sex offense, they can be legally deemed a sex offender at as early as 8 years old.
And some places, some states, again, the juvenile, Pennsylvania doesn't have one, thank God.
Thank God.
But in some states, if you end up on the juvenile sex offender registry at the age of 9, you are on the sex offender registry until you die.
Die for life.
And what the research tells us is that the overwhelming majority of adolescents who do commit some kind of sex crime do not reoffend.
Right. Yeah, there's that too. And I think what is the magic age here in Pennsylvania to be an offender is 14. Yeah, 14. So 14. There's that too, people in Pennsylvania citizens.
Yeah, because that's where we are. We know those best. But
yeah, we know that, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this comes out in terms of the legal battle and what that means for, Pornhub, which is where everyone in the world basically goes for pornography. It's the Walmart of pornography.
Yeah.
But I think for us, the bigger conversation is really to end this about parents having discussions because there are absolutely detrimental effects of children watching pornography. And those can probably really be mitigated if they've got good sex education and have very good conversations and relationships with their parents who are willing to talk to them about it.
Yeah, and let's not even get started on OnlyFans as well, where parents are actually on making content, and then someone's kid finds their friend's parent on OnlyFans, and then that's a whole nother can of
That's a whole
worms.
nother, that will be for another episode.
So there's that.
Yeah. So, but I'll be good. Eli always gets after me. Thank you for joining us. If
Yeah,
you
thanks for joining us.
like the content or you enjoy kind of having these discussions or the education, hit subscribe. Like I said, we are not going to be content creators and make money off of this. Our hope, honestly, at some level, our hope is to have less clients come in to the office, because if everyone starts behaving properly, Eli and I will figure out something else to do with our lives.
Yeah, exactly. We'll pivot.
That will mean the world is at peace.
It's getting better. Yeah, yes. The world is getting better. And
we'll figure it out.
And that part of our life's purpose has been somewhat complete.
Yeah. So again, get some education. Educate. Talk to your kids.
Please.
And don't count on the federal government or the state governments banning young pornography access to mean your child is not actually going to get access to it.
Yeah. Or make it themselves.
Or make, again, a whole nother episode. All right. Thanks, and see us next time.
See you guys later.